Moving on to section 1.4. Section 1.4 begins to talk about angle pairs and the relationship between their measurements and or position. So on some of these angle pairs, there's going to be a relationship between both, but you'll see on some of them, these vocabulary terms, they just define an angle pair based on their position and not their measure. An example of that would be this first one, adjacent angles. You can think of adjacent angles or angles that are next to each other, right? Adjacent means standing next to. So angles 1 and angle 2 are adjacent angles. Our formal definition is two angles with a common vertex and side. And if you remember that common side, it's a ray. Sides of an angle are a ray. So the common, let's define both. The common vertex would be A. They both share A, angle 1 and angle 2. And then the common ray that they share would be ray AD. And remember, we name a ray with the endpoint first, followed by another point on that ray and one arrow above. They're always going to be in the same plane. And like we stated earlier, angle 1 and angle 2 would be our adjacent angles. Moving on to a linear pair. A linear pair is an example of adjacent angles, so it's two adjacent angles, meaning next to, sharing a side, whose non-common sides form a straight line. So again, you can see angles 1 and angle 1 and angle 2, they're adjacent because they share side GH. They share the common vertex G, and then they form a straight line, which is why they're called a linear pair. See the word line in there? And because they form a straight line, remember a straight angle is an angle whose measure is 180 degrees. So we can state that a linear pair, the two measures add up to 180. Measure of angle 1 plus measure of angle 2 equals 180 degrees. And you can see that here. 129 plus 129 plus 51 is 180 degrees. Vertical angles. This would be our angle pair that is non-adjacent, meaning they don't share a side. So two non-adjacent angles. And they are formed by two intersecting lines. Vertical angles are opposite each other. And vertical angles, they do have a relationship between their measure. They are congruent. Okay. So you can see an example of vertical angles here. That would be angle KMI, this angle, and congruent to angle JML, this angle. They both measure 37 degrees. They're opposite of each other. They're non-adjacent. They're formed by two intersecting lines. Okay, let's identify some angle pairs from this figure. There's multiple angles here. Make sure you either use the number. Remember, you can name an angle by using the number inside, or you can name the angle by using a point on each ray and the vertex in the middle. So let's do the first two together, and we'll let you finish up with C, D, and E on your own. For A, angle 5 and angle 6. Angle 5 and angle 6. They're definitely adjacent. They're sharing a side, and they're forming a straight line. So we would classify these as a linear pair. Let's try B. Angle RPS. RPS would be right here. And angle 8 Angle 8 would be right here. So these are definitely adjacent, but they don't form a straight line, so these would just be classified as adjacent angles. Remember, for a linear pair, they need to be adjacent and forming a straight line. Okay, why don't you guys try C on your own? Go ahead and try example C. Identify the angle pair 5 and 8. Angle 5, angle 8. They're opposite of each other. They're non-adjacent. They're formed by two straight lines. These would be vertical angles. Why don't you guys try example D? Angle RPS, whoops, sorry about that. Angle RPS and angle UPS. United States Postal Service. Those are definitely adjacent, and they form a straight line, so this would be a linear pair. And last but not least, let's do this one together. Let's name another pair of adjacent angles. They can be any adjacent angles. We could just say 7 and 5. Remember, adjacent angles are angles that share a vertex and a side. The side these two angles share would be side PT. Okay, moving on. Two last angle pairs that have a relationship just on their measure. So complementary angles. Complementary angles are two angles whose measures have a sum of 90 degrees. So if we have two angles that their measures sum to 90 degrees, we would say the angles complement each other. So we would say angle O and angle Q, 60 plus 30 equals 90 degrees. Angle O and angle Q are complementary angles. I'm running out of room. And then again, in this example, angle UTV and VTS are complementary angles. They do not, let's make note of this up here, do not have to be adjacent. Meaning they don't have to share a side. You see that in the example using angle O and angle Q. They're just two angles whose measures sum to 90 degrees. Supplementary angles, two angles whose measures sum to 180. And again, a linear pair will always be complementary because they form a straight line. But supplementary angles don't always have to be a linear pair. So a linear pair will always be supplementary because they form a straight line. I ran out of room again. Supplementary. An easy way to remember this. Complementary and supplementary. If we were listing out the alphabet, A, B, C, D, E, all the way down to LMNOP, Q, R, S, T. Well, which letter comes first in the alphabet, C or S? C comes before S. 90 comes before 180 on our number line. It's a good way to remember. Complementary, two angles whose measures sum to 90. Supplementary, two angles whose measures sum to 180. All right, let's try these first two examples together in number 2, A and B, and then we'll let you try C. Angle ECD. ECD is right here. It's 59 degrees. We want an angle that's supplementary to ECD. So if you know that a linear pair is always going to be supplementary, you can just pick the angle that forms a straight line, and you know that's going to be supplementary. So that would be angle DCG. All right, let's try B. An angle that is supplementary to ACF. Again, angle that forms a straight line. Let's just pick the angle that is adjacent and forms a straight line. That's probably our easiest. Angle FCB. Whoops. FCB. And our last question says name two different complementary angles to angle ECD. Let's do one of them together and you guys can pick another. ECD is right here. It's 59 degrees. Well, we know that this angle right here, because this is a 90-degree angle, we know that this angle, these two angles would equal 90. So this would have to have a measure of 31 degrees. And 31 plus 59 gets our 90. So we could say angle ACE. And I'll let you pause the video for a sec and see if you can maybe name another angle that equals 31 degrees. It would be directly opposite of it. It might be a vertical angle. That would have been angle GCB. Great, and then we're going to finish with some algebra where we know angles are either complementary or supplementary, and solving for a missing piece and plugging it back in to find their measures. So if we know these two angles are complementary, we know that their sums, the angle measures sum to 90, so we would say 2x plus 6x plus 10 equals 90, and then we'll just solve algebraically. 8x plus 10 equals 90, 8x equals 80, so we get x equals 10. We're not done. It says find the measure of each angle, so we got to plug that in. 2 times 10 gets us 20 degrees, and then what plus 20 gets us 90? That would be 70. Let's try an example where two angles are supplementary, and then you can finish with C and D on your own. If these angles are supplementary, then their angle measures sum to 180. Okay, combine your like terms. 10x minus 20 equals 180. 10x equals 200, so x equals 20. Plug it back in to find the angle measures. 3 times 20 plus 12 gets us 72 degrees. What plus 72 gets us 180? 108 degrees. All right, why don't you pause the video, or the video will pause on its own, and you're going to work out C, and then we'll do D right after. You should have gotten x equals 60. Therefore, the measure of angle ABD would be 60 degrees, and the measure of angle BDE would be 30. Remember, complementary, two angle measures whose sum is 90 degrees. Go ahead and try D. Should have gotten x equals 40. When we plug that in, we get the measure of angle ABD equaling 100 degrees, and the measure of angle BDE equaling 80 degrees. All right, plenty of more practice tonight on your homework with complementary, supplementary, vertical angles, linear pairs, and adjacent angles. If you have questions, I'll answer them during our Zoom class this week.